So I think we can get started. Bruce, go
Okay,
ahead.
well, thank you so much, Marina. And I just wanted to give a warm welcome to everyone that's joined from Stockholm. So if you're lucky enough to be here in Stockholm, it's morning. We're really looking forward to this really interesting discussion that we're going to have on developing global and national indicators for monitoring climate resilient water and sanitation services. And it's interesting just being in this conference. We've been hearing time and time again. It's there's record-breaking stuff going on that's very concerning. The hottest, the driest, the highest sea level. And there's been a lot of discussion about certainly protecting the most vulnerable from climate risks. And so to kind of respond to that as a part of the puzzle in trying to help decision making, the WHO and UNICEF through their joint monitoring program and their global analysis and assessment of sanitation and drinking water program, the GLASS, with all the partners that you saw on the first screen, including an academic consortium, are really trying to craft a way to develop these indicators that are going to help us, understand a little bit more on whether planned existing policies, projects, initiatives are actually improving resilience. So last year, some of you may have joined a session where we introduced a theoretical framework for this. And I'm very pleased to say we've made a lot of progress, and that's thanks to all our partners and experts that have been working with us. So we actually have a draft list of indicators that you'll be able to see. We'll take a look at. And that's where I think the excitement comes in, because these climate risks can be very abstract sometimes. Yes, floods and droughts, et cetera, but there's all sorts of different data sources, governance, infrastructure changes, everything. So you'll see this is quite a comprehensive effort, and you'll be able to take a look and try to understand some of the indicators that are proposed. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of get the session rolling with some opening remarks. And we have a very special guest, Loes van den Elzen from the government of the Netherlands, that will be able to provide some opening remarks. So Loes, if you're still with us, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on this call. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning, and thanks to Marina and the team for your efforts past year, but also organizing today's session. As Bruce already mentioned, I'm very excited about today's update. Last year, the theoretical framework, and today's presentation. I'm very keen on learning from the team and looking forward to the presentation by Marina and Kelly, the contribution by Jose on the linkages with the GGA, the discussion facilitated by Juliet, and of course the closing by Aidan. Well, as the Kingdom of the Netherlands is a long-standing supporter of the Joint Monitoring Program, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to provide a few opening words, and especially on this particular topic for which my government has been a strong advocate and an avid supporter, climate resilient WASH. Well, as Bruce also already mentioned, climate-related hazards, shocks and stresses are increasingly threatening WASH services worldwide. Yet access to sustainable and safe WASH is one of the determinants of a healthy and dignified life, a life in dignity for all, which we strive for. So as the demand globally for climate resilience increases, we have been, and I'd like to remark very much, welcome and still are very welcome the review the WHO, UNICEF in this response have launched, which is to identify key indicators that can strengthen national and global monitoring systems on climate resilience. Briefly, a few remarks on the Netherlands, as we remain a strong partner on water, and for the global water and wash sector, we hear time and time again from many partners in the sector, the work of the JMP team is invaluable. It's crucial to monitor the progress on SDG 6 and providing guidance for sector partners and governments in their policies. And recently, programs supported by the Netherlands have been subject to an ambitious sustainability requirement. So there's an increasing focus on strengthening the enabling environment and system strengthening for sustainable wash service delivery, also focusing on climate resilience of wash. So we consider these climate resilience indicators to be very important because they systematically track and communicate progress on adaptation efforts and allow policymakers and communities also to understand the vulnerabilities and measure effectiveness of actions. And this is much needed. And by providing objective and measurable data, the indicators help decision-making identify best practices, secure resource commitments, and ultimately safeguard human health and the environment against these increasingly intense impacts of climate change. So we welcome very much the team's work on investigating how to provide data on which stakeholders can and should act. And we're also pleased to see the team, of course, is partnering again, also with colleagues from the academic world, such as UTS and the University of Leeds, Bristol, Oxford, and building forth on the previous experience, such as with the Emory University developing and prioritizing indicators for monitoring gender and WASH. Dear all, before I wrap up, allow me to briefly reflect on 3 points in relation to the work on climate resilience. I would like to reflect on significance, the advantages, and timeliness. So allow me to emphasize the significance of this work. We consider this a big contribution to monitoring of climate resilient WASH, where until now efforts have been quite fragmentary and not systematic. The current team is working on the creation of a global standard for monitoring of climate resilience, and as such, provision of a much needed public good. And secondly, the advantages of monitoring these through the GLAS and the JMP, having standard climate resilient WASH indicators adopted by the GLAS and the JMP leverages and strengthens the existing data systems, setting a global standard, but also builds on the existing data processes on a national level in countries, and will contribute to the strengthening of government institutions and systems charged with implementation, oversight, and regulation of the water and sanitation service delivery to further ensure the climate resilience and equitable service delivery. And lastly, on the timeliness of the work, the adaptation to climate change is expected to be a major focus on the post-2030 agenda. So the water and sanitation sector is expected to be a central part of this. And from our perspective, climate change and the adaptation needs to be firmly on the post-2030 agenda to prepare ourselves and our livelihoods for what's ahead. And as the work on the climate resilient WASH indicators is being done at the beginning, well, around the beginning of the post-2030 discussions, the team, so to speak, is ahead of the curve with this work and contributes to better positioning the sector in the lead up these post-2030 discussions. So I would say, well done, you. Thank you so much. So let me finish by again emphasizing my appreciation to the team for their efforts, especially also in these, also particularly for you, challenging times. Thanks to all the partners and everyone that has contributed to the work and contributing together also to the much needed acceleration of action to reach SDG 6 and a life in dignity for all. So thank you so much. Very excited, looking forward. And before I hand over, I would like to ask, let's give an online, I don't know how we can do that, applause to the team for their work. And now I hand it over back to you, Bruce. So where do I find my clapping? Yes.
We clap. Thank you so much, Luz. And I think we can all clap together because it's such a joint effort, as you said. So over back to the team.
Great, thanks so much, Bruce and Luz, and thanks, Luz, for the support for this work. So I will be, my name is Marina Takane from the GLAS team at WHO, and with my colleague Kelly, we'll be giving an update on the process So as Bruce and Luz have mentioned, we have made quite a lot of progress. It is a challenging area of work, but we're excited to present to you some of the progress that's been made. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of background in case you're new to this work. So this is a joint GLAS and JMP initiative. So, climate resilient wash is very much relevant to the monitoring that is done through GLAS as well as for JMP, looking across from the inputs and processes to outputs and outcomes. So we are very much working together on this review. And so we're working to identify frameworks, indicators, data collection opportunities, and data describing the links between climate resilience and WASH. We are working together with a consortium of research partners, as has been mentioned. So we've been working with this consortium for about the past year and a half to support this work. We've also put together a very strong technical working group comprising about 20 individual experts with diverse areas of expertise and also, varied geographic representation. And their role is really to provide their expert inputs into the process and to review the various outputs coming out. And basically to ensure that, we're taking into consideration all of the things that we can as we move through this process of the review. And so the outputs of this review will identify areas where GLAS and JMP can focus future monitoring efforts, so global monitoring. But we do want to include, we have included in the scope of the review indicators and monitoring at other levels. And so, I think we're keen for this short list of indicators to be very much sort of a global good for the sector that will be beneficial to the sector as a whole. But of course, also including and identifying indicators that GLAS and JMP can monitor. So we're keen for this to be very much a multi-stakeholder process and very transparent. We have conducted multiple public webinars and public consultations throughout the process. So we've had 3 public webinars, as well as most recently a public consultation in April. And we will continue to reach out about this initiative through global events and conferences, such as this one, through webinars and training, etc. And of course, we are also set up the timeline so that the results can feed into the work on the global goal on adaptation and specifically identification of indicators for the GGA water target 9A, and Jose will be giving us a bit of an update on this later in this session. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of the timeline. So as mentioned, we've been working with the academic consortium for about 1.5 years. We've had sort of more an official launch and kickoff last summer in July. We've had a number of meetings already with the technical working group looking at the evidence review and discussion paper, followed by a public consultation, webinar and consultation sort of towards the end of last year, early this year. We also had a meeting with the technical working group on the long list of indicators, as well as a public webinar and consultation following that in April, May of this year. We've now been working on the prioritization and shortlisting. So this is expected to take up until maybe until September. We do have a planned meeting with the technical working group in September to discuss the draft shortlist of proposed indicators, which will again be followed by this public consultation phase. And we plan to get into the country pilots probably towards the end of this year, early next year. And of course, we'll be meeting with the technical working group again to discuss the results of those pilots. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand over to Kelly to take us through a few slides on the theoretical framework and some of the example indicators. Over to you, Kelly.
Yes, thank you so much, Marina. Sorry, thank you so much, Marina. My name is Kelly. I'm based at the University of Leeds and part of the academic consortium. And so one of the initial aspects of the project is we developed this conceptual framework to kind of guide the work that we'll be doing to develop the indicators. And so this framework really shows us what's in scope within the project and what's out of scope. And so what we did is we ended up developing these 22 framework components. And so this consists of adaptation actions by different WASH actors. So that's our national and subnational governments, our hygiene promoters and supply chain actors, our service providers and users, and then attributes of the WASH infrastructure, the water supply and receiving waters, and the coordination with solid waste and drainage, and then some more of our outcome components. So our WASH functioning and our user experience in both water, sanitation, and hygiene. And then if we can go to the next slide. So within these 22 candidate framework components, we identified over 400 indicators that we then put towards a global consultation series. So for example, within the framework component adaptation actions by national and subnational governments, we identified 92 indicators. So an example indicator of this is LL 478 and LL 471. So looking at the sufficient budget allocations and expenditure for WASH climate adaptation. So we did that same process throughout all 22 framework components. So we have a few example indicators on here. I'm not going to read every example, but we also looked at within each of these framework components the different kind of sub aspects we could measure. So within adaptation actions by service providers, we could look at if they have an emergency response protocol plan or backup in place. An example indicator of that could be the proportion of service providers with well-defined, evidence-specific action plans ready for execution. And so if we go to the next slide, there's a few more example candidate indicators looking at the attributes, functioning, and experience. So within the attributes of WASH infrastructure, we identified 48 potential indicators. And some of these example indicators are looking at the assets and systems have reduced sensitivity to climate shocks and stressors. Within the WASH service functioning framework component, a kind of sub-component we're looking at is the time and services to be restored is minimized. And so currently we identified these indicators through a series of 3 systematic reviews and a scoping review that fed in to identify the indicators. And then we broke up which indicators had evidence supporting that. So these adaptation actions or attributes that promote climate resilience within the WASH system. And where we didn't have that evidence, we worked with the technical working group and the feedback from the global consultation series to kind of develop these indicators to fill those gaps. And so on the next slide, currently we are working to kind of revise the list from this long list of indicators to a then short list for public consultation in October. And the first step within that process is to digest the feedback from the technical working group and the public consultation on our long list of indicators. So some of you may have fed into that process, and thank you so much for that. The consortium then went away and reduced the long list from about 422 indicators to 317 indicators. And really how we did this was cleaning up any duplicates we had on the list, merging indicators, and then refining the things we are attempting to measure. So those objectives that we're using to map the indicators to the framework components across those 22 framework components. And then what we're currently doing is the technical working group then went and reviewed that refined long list as well as the academic consortium, JMP and GLASS, and we ranked those indicators using a system called XLEAP. And so each indicator was ranked on 5 criteria, so relevance, measurability, sensitivity, comparability, and usefulness. And currently the JMP, GLASS, and consortium team is going through that ranking data and the comments on each of those individual indicators, and trying to identify around 3 to 5 indicators for each framework component that will then be put to a short list for review by the technical working group and the global consultation. So if you want to go to the next slide. And so once the technical working group reviews that, kind of the main points of the discussions and some of the challenges we're seeing within identifying these indicators or shortlisting these indicators is this kind of push and pull between indicators that are monitoring good WASH, but may not necessarily be monitoring climate-specific aspects of WASH. So an example of that is NL95, so the percentage by length of water supply networks, new or refurbished within the last X number of years. And so some of these indicators that we've kept on our list so far are attributes or adaptation actions that, if not done, may exacerbate the effects of climate change, as opposed to just general good WASH indicators. The second kind of challenge we're really facing when shortlisting these indicators is the appropriate level of specificity. So we have identified some really great indicators with good evidence, but they may be too specific for the global kind of level of monitoring and might be more appropriate at subnational or project level monitoring. And so what we're doing to kind of address some of these challenges is how could we refine or adapt the indicators that we have on the long list to meet that kind of specificity, but also comparability across different national governments. And the last is looking at, when we are refining those indicators or identifying those indicators, what indicators do have existing data or evidence, or are indicators that have filled a gap where we don't have that evidence yet for resilient outcomes. And so once we've worked on that with the technical working group, the short list of indicators will be published for public consultation in October 2025. And then there'll be a chance to also engage further by piloting the short list of indicators in specific countries in early 2026. And that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Next slide, please. So just sharing with you the project website if you're interested in learning more, as well as on the right, the QR code will take you to a page where you can sign up to receive updates. So sign up to the mailing list. And so thank you again, and please, please engage with the process, continue to engage with this process. And I feel like we've made a huge amount of progress, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of having a short list of indicators. And so with that, next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Jose Gesti, Senior Water and Climate Consultant with Sanitation Water for All, to talk about the Global Goal on Adaptation process and the links with the work that we're discussing today. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Marina. I hope that you can hear me well. And I would like, before I jump into the Global Goal on Adaptation and the mysteries of it, I would like to say that I'm also lucky to be part of the technical expert group that you have been referring to. And I think because of that, I'm very much into the details of what is being discussed, and I can give testimony, as Louis has started saying at the very beginning from the government of the Netherlands, that we are really ahead of the curve. I'm not aware of any other thematic area within food or health or other thematic area that is as advanced as the work that our colleagues in JMP and GLASS are displaying here. So I just wanted to say that this is pretty impressive. This work that JMP GLASS and the consortium is working on is pretty impressive. But I'm here today to situate a little bit this discussion and this work that is being presented within the broader climate adaptation context. We are referring several times to the Global Goal on Adaptation, which we abbreviate as the GGA. And it's good that we take a little bit of a step back to remember that this is a core part of the Paris Agreement. Indeed, this Article 7 of the Paris Agreement is dedicated to the Global Goal on Adaptation. The aim of this global goal is to enhance adaptive capacity, it's to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to climate change, which is, as we can understand, something very broad. A major milestone since the Paris Agreement was made a reality in 2015, a major milestone to advance with this global goal on adaptation was at COP28 in December 2023, where countries and the parties to the Paris Agreement took a big step forward, and they agreed on a framework that is called the United Arab Emirates Framework for Global Climate Resilience. And this framework outlines several thematic targets, 7 thematic targets, to make the global goal on adaptation something which can be operationalized. It's not just that it's one of the targets, but it's the first target of this framework, that is the target 9A that we are referring to, which is completely devoted to water and sanitation. And this is the target that obviously is more relevant for our conversation today. This target 9A of this global framework is calling for achieving climate resilient water supply and achieving climate resilient sanitation by 2030. The target is broader than that, includes aspects of water scarcity and water-related hazards. To make this GA framework agreed, as we said recently, in December 2023, a 2-year work program was launched, an official work program that is part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. A 2-year work program, as I said, was launched, task to develop indicators against all of the targets of the global goal on adaptation. This process started with submissions from our side in Sanitation and Water for All and UNICEF on behalf of the whole UN Water, and in consultation with all water partners. I could say we made submissions at the beginning of this work program, signaling some potential indicators. It was our submission, together with all the submissions made, resulted in more than 9,000 indicators. And I want to bring to your attention that the expert group, an expert group of 78 experts, is working to take us from 9,000 indicators down to 100 indicators, around 100 indicators. And this is expected to be agreed in a couple of months, COP30 in Belém, in Brazil. I want to emphasize that these expected 100 indicators are for all of the targets of the GGA. So this means that for water and sanitation, we are only expecting a few headline, broader indicators, likely to be around 10 indicators maximum for all the spectrum of water scarcity, water supply, sanitation, related hazards, etc. So, as you can imagine, this is going to be a very limited number of high-level indicators. So where are we now in this process? I just want to highlight that, of course, this 2-year work program that, as I said, is coming to an end in COP30 in just a couple of months. Last week, the 78 experts had a meeting in Nairobi to refine the list. At the moment, down from the more than 9,000 indicators, we were in June at around 490 indicators. And as I said, last week, the experts have met to further refine, look at overlaps, discussing metadata, and started to prepare a technical report that is going to be shared with parties to the Paris Agreement. This technical report is expected to be released fairly soon and ahead of the last workshop of this 2-year work program, which will take place early October. And then this report will be negotiated at COP30. And this is precisely where the JMP and GLASS process is so important. As we say, the work program, the official work program linked to the Paris Agreement, is going to provide this global framework, but is not going to likely offer the sectoral depth that we need for practical decision making. And that's where we see that the JMP and GLASS set of indicators is expected to help us fill this gap. The set of indicators that have been presented right before are certainly offering the technical granularity and the operational insights that we need to translate the high-level targets that we expect from this other official process to translate these high-level targets into local progress. So this is not about duplication. We are talking about two different processes, the one that I'm describing, officially linked to the GGA, and the one that is the focus of this session. It's not about duplication, it's about alignment. The global framework gives us the direction, but the sectoral indicators are going to help us certainly move. As we approach COP30, this is a very important moment to ensure coherence between these two parallel processes. If we get this right, we can ensure that climate resilience in water and sanitation is not just something that we measure, but is actually something that we deliver. Back to you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that overview and explaining the GGA and the GGA process so clearly, and making the links, and especially emphasizing the importance of alignment, which I think is, very much needed. So, so thank you for that. We are moving into the Q&A session. Next slide, please. Which will be facilitated by Juliette Willits from the University of Technology, Sydney, who is, of course, part of the academic consortium for this project. So over to you, Juliette. And I think we are bang on time, so we do actually have a good, 20 minutes or so for questions and answers.
Great, thank you, Marina. And Rick, maybe we can take the slides off, and that way people can see myself and others who will be here to take on some of these questions. So I'll start with the couple that have come in the chat, and please do add your questions. We can see that there's about 86 people online. We'd love to hear from you and to have a good discussion with you. So taking first Brian Reed's question, which I think speaks, Kelly, to an issue you raised of climate specific, climate relevant indicators. He's asking about what's the evidence for dealing with climate as a primary challenge, because other threats like lack of funds, lack of maintenance, user engagement, I'm sure each of us can think of many other challenges. They may be more important than or intersect with climate resilience. And might the climate indicators detract from a focus on other challenges to WASH resilience? So can I maybe ask Kelly, and then if there's anyone else who'd like to follow up with additional answers, I can turn to you.
Yeah, thank you, Juliette. I can start with this question. So this is a major challenge we had, especially within the reviews. So we did reviews specifically within sanitation, water supply, and hygiene, but we also did a review looking at how other sectors measured climate resilience and what we found through that review. So these are sectors that kind of were similar to WASH, transportation, energy, health, that this disentanglement was really difficult to manage. A number of sectors actually didn't specify climate resilience. They kept it at this general resilience and the kind of drivers of that lack of resilience. So looking at lack of funds, lack of maintenance, user engagement, things like that, and aspects like that. For this, because we're looking at the indicators for climate resilience, we did try to identify indicators that didn't broaden into those other potential indicators or kind of drivers of lack of general resilience. But I think that's something that we have this kind of greater list of indicators that could speak to general resilience. So hopefully that kind of answers it. It is a very difficult question, but we did really try to focus on ones that were specific to climate resilience.
Thanks, Kelly. Marina, do you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this was indeed sort of like and still is a challenge that we face in this work. I think in many respects it's not sort of like a zero-sum sort of like, you know, contributing to climate resilience. I think will contribute to WASH resilience as a whole in many cases, if not most cases. So I think, you know, in that sense, I mean, we do think that climate resilience is good for WASH resilience as a whole. At the same time, for this work, we are keen to, as you know, we spent quite a bit of time sort of delineating the scope, because of course we can't cover everything. And by, you know, including sort of WASH resilience as a whole, we sort of also lose the focus on the climate aspect. And here I think we really wanted to focus on the climate aspect. So this is an issue that we continue to grapple with. I don't think, as Kelly said, there's no easy answer here, but we are trying to sort of strike this balance, and, you know, keep the climate specificity while, you know, acknowledging that there is sort of like a broader sort of issue of WASH resilience. So yeah, I see that Bruce has his hand up. Maybe you have the answer, Bruce.
Well, sorry, if you don't allow me. Yeah, no, I just was, because there's another comment too. I think like Brian is a great point, and it wasn't so much I think on the indicators. It was just a philosophical comment, and it's one that we've talked a lot about with the GMP glass, and that is, you know, this issue of, you know, what is safely managed drinking water and sanitation, right? Like I mean, it has to do a lot of things. And to kind of parse it out and say, okay, well, we have a basket that's climate resilient. We have a basket that is, you know, on premise. We have a basket, all these little baskets, and they have to fundamentally be brought together at some point, because we're talking about a service that needs to be sustainable and safely managed. So I think ultimately there'll be all these indicators, and as Jose has said, you know, some will be at a higher level, you know, maybe done sort of more politically. Some will be operational, but ultimately, you know, the user needs to be able to understand this in the context of, you know, what is resilient is safely managed and not have a separate bin. So, I mean, yeah, so we have to bring a bit together. That's not like a specific answer, but I can understand people's concerns over.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Rick, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to make the point that the primary aim of this is to find indicators related to climate resilience that the JMP and GLASS teams could eventually integrate into their monitoring systems. But as a result of the very detailed reviews that the academic consortium has done, and the technical working group and all the other processes, I think we will find a number of indicators that are not suitable for JMP and GLASS, or maybe are not about climate resilience, but are still good indicators. And we'll find a way to tag those and promote those as good indicators as well. And they might feed into other processes. They might feed into broader WHO and UNICEF programming and monitoring. They might feed into this initiative called Align to Accelerate, which is about finding indicators of good WASH strengthened systems. We had a session on that yesterday at Stockholm. So just to flag that in a sense, it doesn't matter whether it's climate resilient WASH or resilient or just good WASH. We need good indicators, but there is also a need for specificity where we can respond to the specific questions of climate resilience and say, look, we've done the due diligence. Here's a set of indicators that we think are well suited to that specific aim, but that's not the full story. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rick. So I'd like to pick up on another question here, which is an equally challenging one that's come up the whole way through, which is about context specificity versus generalized global national level indicators, and that how has the team managed to take that into account, given that climate change manifests so differently in different contexts. So is there anyone who's happy to pick up that question or be the first to jump in? Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. I can answer first on how we identified those different indicators. So we did a review on different WASH frameworks that monitored climate resilience, both at the global, local, and national level. We did struggle a little bit in identifying national indicators or national frameworks for every country or kind of a subset of countries, but we did try to get a comprehensive list of frameworks that would pull those indicators of what people are already monitoring at the national level to account for that different context. And then what we did when we tried to collate all of those indicators to a long list was take that specificity at that national level and try and broaden it out to word the indicator in a way that would be comparable across contexts. And that's what we're still working on right now. So one thing we're doing is trying to maybe kind of subdivide the indicators or kind of split them to apply for different contexts, or make sure that the indicator that how we're wording it could apply across different contexts. And I'm not sure if anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, if I can just briefly add, and then maybe others will want to come in as well. But yeah, I mean, these are really, really good questions. And I think, you know, as we're working on the prioritization and the shortlisting of indicators, something that we're really grappling with. And so I think we are trying to, I think we will do our best in terms of selecting indicators for the shortlist, but I think there will also be a step in once, you know, we get to the piloting and, you know, the actual application of the indicators, where there will be sort of like this contextualization step where basically, you know, I mean, not all of the indicators will necessarily be relevant for every single country and every single context. And so I think there will need to be a bit of a contextualization step in between for the indicators to be, you know, for the data to be collected at country level. So, and, you know, I think we are making an effort to make the indicators as broadly relevant as possible. But I think, you know, it remains that each country is working in a very different context. Over.
Great, thanks, Marina. And Jose, you've raised your hand, please jump in.
Just quickly, thanks, Juliet. Just quickly to reflect on the fact that this issue of context specificity was a very strong argument used by the parties to the Paris Agreement when not for the development of indicators, but even before, for actually agreeing on global targets, such as the global target on water and sanitation. Some parties argued that because adaptation happens at the local level and is context specific, it could be impossible to build a set of thematic targets that would apply at the global level. I have to say, from my side, I always disagree with that approach, right? Like, obviously, you know, nothing is going to be applying to all the context. Like, there will be countries, landlocked countries, say Zambia, that certainly is not going to be likely exposed to sea level rise, correct? But that does not mean that we cannot think about sea level rise in a global way and set targets at the global level. Moreover, I always, in this process, I always challenge by saying that yes, adaptation and climate action is something that is contextual and happens at the local level. And so is sustainable development. And yet we've been able to agree on a set of global targets and indicators that, you know, apply at national level. I'm not really responding, but I just wanted to throw this because it's been such an interesting topic for discussion over years till we got into this agreement of the global goal on adaptation. Back to you, Juliet.
Great, thank you, Jose. So I want to turn now to a process question. There's a question in here regarding engagement with governments in this process and the fact that they're the ones ultimately that end up needing to operationalize these global systems. How have they been involved? How are they envisaged to come into this process? I'm just wondering if perhaps Rick, you might want to jump in on that.
Sure, happy to. I think obviously governments are the ones who, in the end, will be the main duty bearers and the ones who need to implement these interventions as well as monitoring systems. I think we need to be ready to engage with government. So the process we're going through now, I see as an essential first step, if you will. We don't want to engage with a government ministry and say, we've identified 422 potential indicators for climate resilient wash. What do you think of them? We just can't. So if we can come to them, say next year, and say, listen, we started with 422, we went down to 317, and now we've come up with what we think are, I don't know how many, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 30, I don't know, but a smaller set of indicators, they still won't be done. Though we would be at a stage of saying, we think these have promise and they need to be refined, and we want to work with you to hear, does this make sense? How could it be adapted and integrated into existing national monitoring systems? So I think that will be a really critical stage where we kind of ground truth, the practicality of some of these things. Because honestly, to be frank, some of these indicators that have been proposed have never actually been used or data have not been collected in them. And some of them won't be practical when it comes to, the rubber hitting the road, as they say. So just to say that we do expect and plan to have pilot experiences with countries, and that's where this extremely important task of working with governments and finding out what works, what's relevant, what's important to them will happen. So if there are people who work with governments or governments available, interested on this call, go to those QRs, sign up, and we'd love to partner with you. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rick and Marina. I can see you'd like to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I agree completely with Rick that that engagement with countries will become a lot more important. As we have a short list and we're sort of working towards the piloting. But I did also want to note that we do have a few government sort of country representatives in our technical working group. So we are also trying to take into account those perspectives throughout the process of the review. And just to note that, in addition to government representatives, we also have people working in countries. So, we really are trying to take into account sort of country perspectives, people working on the ground and sort of grappling with these issues as we're working through the process as well. But I think sort of that broader engagement with countries will come more, towards the end of this year, early next year, as we're working on the pilots, and then as we sort of roll out. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. Over. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marina. So there's two main question areas I'd like to cover if we can before we close up. And one, there's a few questions which pertain to what Kelly described as what was in scope and out of scope. So there's a question that's around, well, what about resilience of the wider water resources? If we're not looking at it, what happens to that? There's another that asks about land use planning and all these other I guess, parameters which impact on the climate resilience of water and sanitation hygiene services. And there's yet a further one, which is around climate resilience and waterborne disease. I'm just wondering if any of you would like to talk about, the interface between what we monitor when we're monitoring climate resilient water, sanitation and hygiene, and these other areas that, of course, intersect with it. There's someone who'd like to jump in first. Oh, okay, Rick put his hand up.
Sure, and I can't digitally put my hand up somehow. Well, just to say with humility, the JMP and GLASS teams are not the best equipped or positioned to be leading global monitoring of water resources. We just don't have the mandate. We don't have the technical capacity. It doesn't mean it's not important. It means that we're not the right institutions to be playing a leadership role on that. And similarly, there are other important elements that should be monitored, but not necessarily by us, that you'll see in that framework document as listed as out of scope. Not to open a can of worms at this time, but there's a big question about mitigation. And there's a ton of work going into monitoring emissions and reducing emissions, super important, but a huge work package. And already this, what you see within scope is a huge work package. And that's the bit that we felt was the most relevant to the JMP and GLASS teams. And that's why we focused on those things. But I see Bruce has raised his hand. So maybe, Bruce, you want to jump in on this?
Well, I have to say I've been enjoying the questions. And the waterborne disease, really, that one struck me, with the WHO hat on, because ultimately, like, what a challenge is it to monitor globally waterborne disease? And I was just thinking of cholera, which, people, it's a sensitive to climate, right? But then it gets to this other question that Brian and others have raised about resilience. And so we start thinking, oh, why do we have, cholera outbreaks and all sorts of, reasons about infrastructure and failing wash services. And then you have that climate part of that. So, I guess it's just a really complex world, and it depends on, what you want out of these, right? Because if you sort of want to kind of get a deep under kind of a proximal or a correct understanding about whether there's climate resilient services, I guess it's kind of difficult when you start looking at disease, but nonetheless, fascinating stuff. So that wasn't much of an answer, but it was just to kind of have a little bit of a commentary. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Is there anyone else who wants to come in on the boundary question? Because otherwise I'm going to move to a really important question from Jane Wilbur around inclusion. And so she's raised the question particularly in relation to disability inclusion, and that we've got limited guidance on how to address that, even at the best of times, in terms of climate resilience, and how in this process of coming up with indicators, how are we managing to hold inclusion front and central when we know that it's most vulnerable groups who are most impacted. So is there anyone who'd like to pick up on that? Kelly, you were nodding, so
yeah, I think it's a really important point, and something that we tried to really focus on throughout the reviews is it worth having, a specific indicator related to inclusion, or trying to have inclusion, equity, these kind of bigger ideas and really important aspects of resilience kind of integrated throughout. So one thing we're looking at with the indicators is, could we disaggregate certain indicators to pick up on equity, disability, these really important factors, or is it worth having a specific indicator to measure that? I think we're leaning more towards, especially looking at other reviews within not only just the wash sector, but these other sectors. So the health sector was a really important one for this, is that disaggregation seems to be a way to highlight this throughout the entire process versus kind of a one-off indicator that may be dropped from the shortlisting. But I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of add to that.
Okay, so you can, but only if you're quick, because we're just about coming up to time. Is there anyone else who wants to add? Okay, so apologies, there's a couple more questions in the chat that we haven't quite got to, and yeah, if anyone wants to write an answer, please feel free. But I will from here hand back to Marina. Thank you everyone for your engagement, and at least sharing a little bit of a pain of how challenging this exercise has been, but also how enjoyable to work in a community that really cares about coming up with the right indicators that are going to help drive this area forward. So with that, thanks, Marina, back to you.
Thanks so much, Juliet, for facilitating this Q&A session, and thanks to all of you for your questions. I think you've put sort of really highlighted some of the challenges that we've been facing, you know, throughout the process, and especially that we're, you know, grappling with right now as we're shortlisting the indicators. So really big thank you to all of you for your thoughtful questions and comments. So with that, I'm going to hand over, next slide please, to Aidan Cronin, Senior Advisor, Results and Resources, Water Sanitation, Hygiene from UNICEF. Over to you, Aidan.
Thanks so much, Marina, and thanks everyone. That was a really great session, and it's an honor to close it. It's a critical discussion that, you know, I think essential to where we're going in our sector for the WASH in the evolving climate crisis. You know, monitoring is critical to the quality and the breadth of the evidence that will be drawn upon to make policy and action decisions. And, you know, we have to be very clear on an issue as critical as resilience. What we're doing is the best that we can. And there'll always be tough decisions, as you heard during the discussions, as to how that lands. But I think the kind of quality and depth of the consultation going into this process is helping to do that. I was also interested to hear the various efforts to align you know, the different monitoring approaches that are going on. You know, Rick also mentioned on Align to Accelerate, which is around systems. This is, you know, we had a session yesterday in Stockholm here on Online to Accelerate and getting a core set of indicators for WASH system strengthening. And I was also mentioning in that session that, you know, that's absolutely critical to the climate crisis. We need a strong national WASH sector in every country contributing to a solution in the global crisis like climate. We also heard today about the importance of partnership, and partnership is key. We've seen a lot of partnerships forming in this process, WHO, UNICEF, academia, other voices coming in, and, you know, several very important comments around, you know, government and other development partners, which I think that will really become extremely important now in the next phase, where the indicators get sharpened and pilot tested, etc. I liked the discussion, and I think, you know, really good points. Juliet, you did a great job to try and moderate that, but like a really diverse set of points, but all touching on the critical issues, the, you know, inclusion, how we link to big water, you know, how are we involving and putting government in the driving seat of this moving, and that has to be practical. We can't go, you know, with 400 million. This has to be something that has to be lifted up, and that can be lifted up. So maybe just to wrap up, that, you know, I think we're all looking forward to the next kind of exciting stage now. Is really, you know, Rick said the rubber hitting the road, so I think that's where we're heading to, and I think, you know, really great progress being made. You know, several times we've heard in the call that, you know, please do engage. It's really important, the full set of ideas and thoughts are coming in. So just with that, thank you again, everyone, and all the best from Stockholm. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.